Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 128. I have Rudyard Lynch, who is the founder of the WhatIfAltHist channel on YouTube. It's a very good channel discussing lots of aspects of history and trends, and there's a lot of wisdom, and he also makes some predictions there. There's a lot of good stuff there, and he's put out a lot of good work, and he's gotten a lot of attention. How are you, Rudyard?
I'm doing well. How about you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on. How'd you get into all of this historical stuff, and how long have you been doing this channel?
I'm 22 now, and I started this channel on my 13th birthday. And the reason I did that is because I was really into the alternate history space. Like, what if the South won World War II? What if the Nazis won the Civil War? And with that, I really loved it. So I made an alternate history channel, and that was what I did for the first 7 years. And I gradually got bored of it, and I've moved to doing alternate history. I moved to doing philosophy, anthropology, history, geopolitics, that sort of thing. And so that's what my channel's about now, where I try to study the patterns in history and human nature and try to figure out how the world works and what the future might be like. And I've been doing it for 10 years. I've been doing it professionally for, I would say, for 3 years now. So this is my full-time job now. I dropped out of college to do the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so the YouTube channel is making you a living. That's always good if you can monetize that. Are there any other history channels that inspired you out there? I mean, I haven't.
Actually, my big inspiration was Cody from Alternate History Hub. And it's funny now that Cody's a fan of my channel, so it's gone full circle.
Yeah.
But I really loved Alternate History Hub growing up. And when I was 13, like, he was the big alternate history channel.
Yeah. So I haven't really noticed alternate history. It's just, but you are certainly looking at history, and you're noticing a lot of big trends. You have this ability to see the big picture, but also to see the small details, and that's not something that's a gift that a lot of people don't have. What are you noticing? What have you learned about America? Since you've been studying American history, because I've certainly studied a lot of American history too.
I mean, I think the biggest thing I've noticed about America is that Americans aren't good at understanding America because we rarely deal with unless we don't know what makes our culture special. I mean, for most Americans, the only real other ethnicity we deal with are Mexicans, and that's in the Southwest. Like, there aren't that many Mexicans where I grew up in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And then a handful of Chinese people who have assimilated, or Asians who have assimilated. And so most Americans don't understand how strange their culture is. And like, you can there are these anthropology charts, and I've found generally two axes: individualism and trust. And America is one of the most aberrant cultures in the world. Like, if you plot us on a chart, we are one of the strangest ever. But Americans don't have any concept of that. And I mean, American regional cultures is one of my favorite things to talk about. So you could get me going forever about that. But, I mean, also, America has so many different things going on, and we kind of paper it over with plastic. We pretend that we're all a single unified society. But I mean, coming from Pennsylvania, there are places in Europe that feel closer to where I grew up than going to Los Angeles. Or each part of America operates with very different cultures, different economies, different social structures. But since you can drive to a Walmart in every state, we don't think about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. You being originally from Philadelphia, and I grew up where we got Pittsburgh television. You, as I've said, you almost have two separate states there, because so many people in Pittsburgh have never been to Philadelphia, and so many people in Philadelphia have never been to Pittsburgh. Yeah. But for whatever reason, they still are one state. But this made me think of one channel. There's this one. I should share this one video with you. This guy, he went through and looked at all the different American accents, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Which was wild. And you can look those up on Wikipedia too, where I've been told I have no accent. It doesn't seem like you really have an accent either, but
yeah, it's interesting where beyond accent, living in different parts of the country, you pick up tilts. Like Los Angeles doesn't have an accent, but the people there definitely do speak a certain way. I don't know how, like their vowels are elongated. Yes. They have like at this point, I think in sound, where for me, some people think visually. When I do my analyses, it's coming through my head as I'm hearing a song. And at this point, I can immediately tell that someone is from Los Angeles in the first 20 seconds of the song, based off just how their voice sounds, because it's that distinctive. But it's part of the American accent. And so, I just find that interesting.
You talked about individualism and trust. What do you think makes America unique on that scale? Because we do think of America as being individualistic.
This is a chart that I kind of invented, but I do this with a lot of anthropology, where anthropology is not really a synthetic field where you'll have lots of different disciplines that have different ideas, and no one's put the effort of combining their ideas together. So there is a trust axis and there's an individualistic collectivist axis. People haven't put them together. So America is the highest in both trust. We are very high in both trust and individualism. And the countries that we're closest to in that axis are other English-speaking countries like Canada, Britain, Ireland. And then after that, the Dutch, the Germans, the Scandinavians, whatever. High trust, high collectivism is Japan, where if you drop your wallet on a Japanese street, someone will pick it up. But it's a society that recently said you had to die for the emperor. And we are expected to work 14 hours a day because your boss tells you to. Low trust, high collectivism is like Africa, where it's a society that because Africans don't have a long history of urbanization. If you go to a city in Africa, people are constantly trying to scam each other and get a one-up on each other. And their governments often devolve into tribes playing against each other because they haven't had very much experience with large organizations. So they're collectivist, low trust. Individualist, low trust is a lot of Native American peoples, where the Iroquois or the tribes in the Amazon today, they are tribes where the individual, you have a lot of pride as an individual and a lot of leeway, but also, again, trust comes about at the end point of living in large urbanized societies where you have to develop trust because you're a culture of 10 million people. And so you have to develop ways for those 10 million people or 100 million to interact. If you're a tribal people in the Amazon, where you're living in communities of 100 people, you never had to evolve. You never had to build up those high trust social institutions.
Yeah. What would you call an example of collectivistic and low trust?
Oh, I said that before. That's Africa.
Okay. Africa. Yeah. It reminds me too of an associate of mine who came from Brazil, and people said he was always locking things and always putting his name on everything.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's a low trust society. And I've heard about some places too, when I was in Tbilisi, in the Caucasus Mountains, and people say, if you leave your laptop in a cab, the cab driver will come looking for you.
Yeah.
And I think most of us would like to live in that. I think most of us would like to live in that.
I think that's still a decent amount of America. I think if you're in Nebraska, there's a solid shot that happens.
Yeah. Small town America, I would say so. Yeah. Nebraska. Yeah. What do you think? What are you've talked a lot about where America is going now. Being a 22-year-old male, you certainly have some perspectives. What are you noticing? Because you seem like you're predicting something's going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, for a frame of reference, I say a lot of very black-pilled stuff, but I am in the long term optimistic on America. And I'm going to put that out where I think America is one of the countries that's best off in the world. And when I talk about these flaws in America, I want your audience to keep in mind, I think America is still probably one of the safest bets of countries to pick. But
Yeah.
Barring that, I am not optimistic at the short term. I think that we are on the verge of a revolution or civil war, and I don't know exactly how that's going to pan out, but I'm confident that we're going to start seeing political violence soon. And I also think that our culture is, for lack of a better term, not adapted for the complexity of what we're doing. And I think we're going to start seeing a bunch, and I've covered this in a bunch of different videos through different guises. And the way my channel often works is that I'm talking at the same event, but I'll make 30 videos from slightly different perspectives on it. And so it might come across to my audience as if, oh my God, all these things are going to be horrible. But the reality is it's 2 or 3 events that will be, in retrospect, looked back upon as 2 or 3 events as historians. But the thing is, we have to live through them. And so I'm trying to develop all these historical proxies to kind of explain what's going on right now. So I think that we're facing a combination on one side due to aging, where because of aging and urbanization and all those other factors, the industrialized world is not in a position where we really can deal with how rapid the social changes of the last 200 years have been. I think that's going to cause social breakdown in a bunch of different ways that we don't really have a comparison to before in history. And I also think, and this is something Peter Turchin studied, that you can use computer models to predict when societies have revolutions and civil wars. And it's built off 3 variables. And Turchin's plugged this data into about 20 different historic revolutions or civil wars. And it came out with, and he was able to predict, using those 3 variables, the exact years those crises took place in. And about 15 years ago, we predicted that the 2020s would see major political violence in America. And everything we've seen since has basically vindicated him in that belief.
Yeah. Have you read that Strauss-Howe generational theory stuff?
No, it's funny that
the fourth turning.
I got it back there on my American history shelf, and I can't give a good logical reason for why I haven't. It's totally up my alley. I know the theories. A lot of my friends have read it. I just haven't gotten around to reading it.
Yeah, I haven't read. I've known of them for a long time. They also seem to be the ones who popularized the term Generation X, which have always despised. But I guess we're stuck with that.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a bunch of
my generation is, but yes.
I mean, I see a bunch of different metrics for. I saw a bunch of different tests and theorems that came out with the idea that we'd have a major world crisis in 2020, and it's interesting because a lot of them go really far back. Where there's this really unreadable book called Long Cycles by Goldstein. I recommend none of you read it. Just listen to the summary that I had to read through it. But he found a bunch of economic variables and predicted in the 70s that we'd have a major world crisis in the 2020s because he found these recurring cycles every century with the world wars, Napoleonic wars, 30 Years' War, etc., going back for the entirety of modern history. So that was one. David Hackett Fisher also used economic data in the mid-'80s to predict that we would have a major social crisis on the scale of the Black Death or the French Revolution in the 21st century. Neil Howe, with his fourth turning model, predicted, I don't want to forget his buddy too, whose name?
Strauss.
Strauss. But he predicted in the 90s, I think, that 2020s would be a massive turning point in American history. And then there's a Turchin in 2010 also used economic data to predict that the 2020s would have this crisis. And so this is across a bunch of different fields and many different authors. And this leads back to a point that I want to make, that I want to be very clear, and I always talk about with fans of my audience, that you can roughly get heuristics for what might happen in the future, but actually predicting events is impossible. And I try to be open about that. I say I'm betting against God. That's one of my catchphrases, where these authors might have predicted something would happen at 2020, but they didn't know about Me Too. They didn't know about wokeness. They didn't know about the digital revolution. They didn't know about China's rapid rise and now what I think will be plateau and crash. And so you can predict certain things will happen, but the actual events as they play out will still be a mystery to you when they do.
Sometimes the people who make the predictions aren't always sane either. Have you ever, by chance, read the Kaczynski Manifesto?
I have, yeah.
There's a guy who predicted some things that were happening right now.
I actually think the Unabomber's manifesto is brilliant. I think his dissection of the problems going on now is brilliant. I think that because I don't believe you can separate a philosopher from the philosophy. And that's something I keep in mind, where I can swear on your podcast, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Karl Marx was a fucking loser, and Rousseau was a loser. These were people who never held stable jobs. Everyone around them said they were terrible people. They were vindictive. And then are we surprised the philosophies they come out with don't work? And then you look at Jesus, Marcus Aurelius, etc. These are people which were widely acknowledged to be saints, and then their philosophies last for thousands of years. And I don't think it's perfect, but I think there's definitely a correlation between the thinker and the ideas. And Kaczynski was a schizo, like, let's be honest. And he was brilliant, but his schizoness kind of bled into his worldview. And I think that his understanding of how to stop industrialization, and this is a problem I see with people in STEM, where they view everything as like a machine. I think we got to break the machine. The reality is that historical processes happen gradually, and they occur with so many different variables that it's like watching a plant grow. It's an organic process. And so what I see with Kaczynski's model is that the industrial civilization he talks about is unsustainable. And he's that very clearly with the birth rate, where no industrialized society ever, or no industrial society for the last century has had a stable birth. It's complicated. I could go into more but of the data here, but we've had a basically straight birth rate decline since 1800, with World War II acting as a brief break. But the thing is, I don't think Kaczynski's model of using terrorists to blow up scientists would work. What would happen instead is the birth rate collapses and society goes through a gradual process of decay.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I get with the World Economic Forum types, where I think the guys behind the World Economic Forum are intelligent, but they lack social awareness and awareness of how life works. I don't know how else to say that, where they say, we want degrowth. And I think they understand the world's population is going to go into decline. And so they think we need to make sure that we control this process, which is a very autistic managerial way to view the world. And the way I see it is, if the population is going to decline, let it decline, do the best you can, and don't try to control what's a natural process.
Yeah. Well, and being a libertarian, I don't really see. It's amazing how the markets and just other things like that regulate themselves and end up producing good results. I don't think we had to go this way. But one of the, granted, neither of us endorse what Ted Kaczynski did, certainly, but the analysis of how being industrialized has really removed us from the life or death struggles that we used to go through. It seems as though we don't feel like we're as powerful as we could be, or we need to find other ways to feel powerful and feel like we can make a difference.
Yeah. It fits very easily with Mouse Utopia, which I don't know if you want me to explain to your audience, but I see it as decadence on steroids, where you see this kind of process in every major civilization, the Romans, the Indians, the Chinese. It's just that we have it on steroids.
I know what you're talking about. They gave the mice everything, and for a while, the mice flourished, but then afterwards, the mice stopped reproducing, and the sexes blended, and then they died out.
And I don't pretend to have all the answers, and we're looking at a crisis that will not be pleasant. And if I were to pretend all the answers, I'd be a charlatan. I'm just gradually trying to figure out one thing at one time, and we don't have to have the answers now. We just need to survive the next day until we can get better answers.
And ultimately, the one thing that's scarier about us versus the mouse utopia is we have the ability to kill 100,000 people in a matter of 5 minutes.
I mean, with all thirds ballots and all
Yeah.
things, that is one side of it. The other side is that we can realize we're in mouse utopia and do something to stop it.
Yeah. I think we can, and the one thing, that I agree with you completely about is feminism. What's going on? You're 22. What's going on with guys your age right now?
With most guys my age, it's really Gen Z is the first generation since World War I, where I think social class, I don't mean that in purely economic terms, determines your entire life. Where if you look across all of Gen Z, you find a small group, especially men, a small group that does very well and a large group that's left behind. And that's the case with dating and sex, where there is a small demographic that does very well and has a lot of the options, and then most guys are fucked, or they're not fucked. That's the problem. But I mean, I think for guys in their early 20s, 80% are single because it's 2/3 for for all men from 18 to 30. And I guess that would skew even younger. And I'm assuming more guys are lying as well. And also 30% of men under 30 are virgins. And these are statistics where you look at that and you think, holy shit, society is going to fall apart if that's the case. But it's something that if you talk about, you're just immediately rejected by the society. You can't voice these problems at all. And the thing I think is, you people are idiots. Even if I know our ruling class doesn't like young men, but besides that, don't you want your society to survive? And you don't want to have this giant demographic that's basically revolution fodder.
And they are revolution fodder. That's definitely the truth. Rudyard, it used to be a situation, where you might have had 11 boys on the football team, 11 cheerleaders, and every football, and one football player was pairing up with one cheerleader, and they were messing around. And now it's like, a situation where all the cheerleaders are messing around with the quarterback, the running back, and the wide receiver, and the other 8 guys are just not getting anything. And like, what's going to happen to your football team if it's like that?
And I think it's partially a breakdown in in-person communication, because what you can do now is, if you're the quarterback or the receiver, is that what you're doing is you're messaging all these girls independently. They come to your place, then they think they are your main girl. No idea you're with the other 6 girls. And so that's how it works. And so that's why, for example, 2/3 of women in their 20s are in relationships, and 1/3 of men are, because these women are going on dates with this guy. They think they're in a relationship. This guy actually has 5 other girls. He does not see himself as being in a relationship. And he has no reason to dissuade her, because he's getting what he wants. And so, and I think, like, for example, as a young guy, we've made it taboo to pick up girls in most places. I will watch old movies, or hear people talk about people used to meet girls at the mall or flirt with waitresses. That stuff is taboo now. Like, it's just not socially acceptable. And so what we've seen is a winnowing down to dating apps and a handful of other places like college campuses, but then those select for massive inequality. And dating apps especially, if you made dating apps a country, they would be the second most unequal country in the world. They'd be ahead of Venezuela.
That and you go back 60 or 70 years ago, work. You could ask a woman out for a date at work, and she would say no, and it would just be forgotten. And now it's it's getting to that point, where men cannot really go up and approach women on the street or anything like that, because they've made, I think, largely because women have gotten so paranoid. Really what it is, is a guy may approach, a guy may go out to the bar, and maybe he goes up and approaches 20 women. It only takes one woman to say, hey, that guy is approaching all these women. And, and then she spoils it ends up poisoning the well for everybody. it's not a good situation. And yeah, online is a disaster. It really is.
And the problem is that this is an issue that cannot be discussed in society at all.
Yeah.
And that really shocks me. That a problem, and I see this with social class too, where most young Americans are barely getting by economically, but you will not be caught dead seeing these things discussed on Fox News or CNN or mainstream outlets.
Yeah, Rudyard, as I pointed out, just recently, did Joe Biden go to Hawaii? No, but he went to Israel.
Yeah, we're
it's
and I see this with having a war in Israel or in China, that I don't know if we'll have a war with Israel, or I don't know if we'll have a war with Iran over Israel.
Yeah, over Israel.
I could see our ruling class making a decision. We're going to draft young men to fight in this war. And I did a poll of my audience, and my audience tilts young men, conservative, more educated, higher social class, better armed than the average population. And so it's my audience is like the perfect people who you'd want to draft in a war. And 90% said they wouldn't want to go to fight a war over Israel. And 75% they said they wouldn't want to fight China over Taiwan. And so if my sub-demographic doesn't want to do that, that is a really bad sign. But I could see our ruling class just not caring at all, and then passing a draft, and then that causing social breakdown, because the young men who would do that would basically just tell them to fuck off.
Yeah, it's one reason why I think this could actually be comparable to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. You had the Shah who was kissing up to Israel, and the public said no, and Iran has not been pro-Israel ever since. And something else too I've noticed. I was 19 when the first Gulf War happened. 1990, 91. And one thing I remember, there were still a lot of World War II veterans who were alive at the time. And even my dad, who was a Korean War veteran, and they were all gung ho. Yeah, let's go to war. Let's go to war. And I see all these guys now, older than you, but in their 30s, maybe early 40s. They're all veterans, and they're like, no. I have to admit, I hated veterans when I was that age, because they were all pro-war, and now all the veterans, they're anti-war too, which is Dan Crenshaw's not, but with the exception of veterans who've been bought off. But
I mean, you've seen a really remarkable shift occur in politics or political allegiances over the last 5 years. Where I remember growing up. I'm from an hour outside Philadelphia, and I grew up in a pretty rural area. But in the area where I grew up, where most people were right-leaning Christians, evangelicals were seen as crazier than people on the left. That was just the consensus. And then over time, that kind of flipped, where people on the left were seen as much more intolerant and crazy than people on the right. And then evangelicals, who became seen as much more reasonable. But it's also a much deeper shift, where people who would be hippies 15 years ago are now on the right. Russell Brand, that JB, like people who are anti-vaxxers, people who distrust authority, people who don't want external wars.
JB Sears, yeah,
these are hippie traits. Now you see them popping up on the right. Or the right used to be super aggressive, and the left was more pro-peace. Now you see the left really being for the Ukraine war and being against Russia. And you see most of the isolationist sentiment coming from the right now. And it's just a bunch of different realignments that quietly happened when no one noticed. And the political coalitions we see now are very different from what they were 15 years ago.
Yeah, and I don't know how coronavirus. By the way, how did you all go through the whole coronavirus insanity?
That's funny. So
I can imagine too, because this is something too. I think about the decline of masculinity and the decline of society. I don't even think Reagan would have bought into the corona narrative. I really don't. I think he would have said, "We'll get through this."
Yeah. I was actually going through my journal entries like 2 or 3 days ago from when I was in lockdown, and that time was miserable. And I don't think we've really collectively come to terms with that as a society, how unpleasant living through coronavirus was. Because I was going through my journal entries, and I remember counting down the days until lockdown was over in the spring of 2020. And Pennsylvania ended lockdown pretty early. Like, society went back to normal in June of 2020. And but I know, like, I have relatives in Boston, and for them, they had coronavirus till the end of, they had lockdown till December of 2020. And that blows my mind. I can't believe that. In Canada, they had a lockdown. I also have relatives in Canada. They had lockdown until the end of 2021. That's insane. And they had lockdown even when 70% of the population was vaccinated. And for me, my coronavirus story is I was in Peru, and then I had a friend who was Chinese, and he knew someone in Wuhan, and I called him up, and he said, "It's crazy. You got to get back to America." And so I booked a flight the next day, and I gave myself 20 minutes to get through Lima Airport because it's a pretty small airport. I gave myself an hour thinking that it would take 20 minutes. It took an hour and a half to get through. I got out on the last call for last call for the flight. Later that day, I realized that was the last flight out of Peru because Peru closed its borders. So I made last call to get back to America. And then I caught COVID in Miami airport, and I was stuck at home for 6 weeks because I had some weird version where I was hacking up phlegm. My face went dry and red. I had that for 6 weeks. I had a really bad immune system at the time. But I remember at the start of COVID, I am somewhat sympathetic to the governments because we had no idea what was going on for COVID. We didn't know what it was. And I understand that people freaked out, and it would be reasonable to panic. But then after that, it became clear that it was a tool of state power and that they wanted it to keep going because it gave them more authority. And I was listening to clips of Justin Trudeau saying people who didn't want to take the vaccine were extremists that should not be tolerated. And the thing I see with Canada is that Canada is a mirror image of America. They are very similar societies. And it scares me that Canada is the country in the Western world that I would say is the most restrictive of individual freedom. And America is the country in the Western world with the most individual freedoms. So if Canada can do it, that can happen here.
I've not been to, well, I've been to Canada a long time ago. So I've been to Peru too. And the other thing too, is you realize that's a country where you can't just shut down the economy.
Yeah. I mean
it's the poorest country I've ever been to.
Yes. Most people have hand to mouth there. And the Peruvian government went way overboard. It's not, what they did is not comparable to Western countries. And third world countries often have erratic behavior where I think Turkmenistan said COVID never existed. They said it was all a conspiracy theory. That's one extreme. Peru is the other, where in Peru, they would have guards on the street. They wouldn't let people leave their houses. And they often wouldn't let people buy groceries. And the reason they did that was that, this is another third world country syndrome, is they wanted to show the West how advanced they were. So they went super overboard with COVID to show how sophisticated they were, even though the effect upon their own citizens was horrifying. And that's a Latin America moment.
I know they had lots. I didn't want to go down this hole too much. Where else do as you pointed out, in some of your videos, said the only interaction that men have with women anymore is porn and feminism. I don't know how we really get out of this other than creating new situations where that doesn't exist. I
think this is a general social problem where I would guess, I think McIntyre, he's a big Twitter influencer. He found that 50% of men had never cold approached a woman. They never walked up to a woman and asked her on a date. And that blows my mind. I've done that easily, like dozens upon dozens of times. And to think that half of men my age had never done that blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I think we underestimate how much of the population goes to work, then just goes through Instagram. They scroll through Instagram at home.
Yeah.
I mean, the average American works pretty long hours, and so it makes sense. But it's a tragedy of the commons thing. And I just think most people, especially in my age demographic, have very few social connections. And this dating issue is a continuation of that breakdown of community, which is overall killing our society. And
yeah, because if you're not reproducing, you're not going to continue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it as feminism is stuck in this double bind where women are empowered, but also they are completely helpless. And this is really not a useful double bind because it makes women incredibly weak, but also talks them up and makes them arrogant. And this is the worst position you should possibly be, because the converse should be true. People should be humble, but also strong. And what I found is that men and women today often exist, because we're so digital, they often exist in very different cultural ecosystems. So the expectations that a man has going to a date are very different from the expectations a woman has, because they exist in digital ecosystems that tell them the exact opposite things. For a guy my age, most men in my age group listen to Andrew Tate. For women, they'll listen to feminism. And that's not a good combination if you want to produce families and a cooperative society.
Well, there was also a system, maybe going back 7 or 80 years, where almost any guy could figure out what the rules of the game are.
Yeah.
It was pretty much, you got to go ask the girl out. You got to go call the girl on the phone. You hold the door open, and now you have some women who still, I want you to hold the door open for me. And then there are other women who say, don't hold that door open for me. I can get it myself. And the guy's like, how am I supposed to know? And as I've said too, sometimes, I find, even though I'm not religious anymore, with even some of the, say, conservative Christian women, for example, I said, well, I know I'm not allowed to say the F word. I know what the rules are with her, but with women on the left, you don't know what's going to be offensive today and something isn't offensive tomorrow, or it's impossible to tell what the rules are.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I generally found for Gen Z girls, the two rules are anxiety mitigation and ability to walk away. Because anxiety mitigation is that Gen Z is a very anxious demographic, and that hits women harder than men. Where for Gen Z men, you'll find a small category that is very courageous, very not anxious, etc. But the anxiety I talk about in our society hits women the hardest. And so this is not a PC thing to say, but one of the things you see with Gen Z girls is they'll complain about things where they've purposely set up the incentive for men to do that, where they're like, why do guys not ask us on dates or put us into relationships, or why do guys play with their hearts and go? Because the guy is incentivized to not make this official, because that provokes anxiety. And so this is why Gen Z relationships are so casual, where, for example, situationships, you don't end up in a relationship, you end up going on a series of dates. Because that is the lowest anxiety threshold, which is what works better. And the ability to walk away is also important, where if you run into a crazy girl, just stop seeing her. The problem is that a lot of guys don't have the leverage for that, because it's such a Pareto distribution thing, where if you're at the top, you have the ability to just say, this girl's crazy, move on to the next one. But if you're not in that category, that's why you get simping, because you just don't have the leverage to walk away.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. I'm wondering how anxiety mitigation. Yeah, I do wonder what's happening now. And I'm wondering if this is a big city, small town thing or something like that.
But I think it is. It's worst in the big cities. It's better in small towns. But I think it still is a problem anywhere. And so even if you're a passport bro and you go to third world countries, you'll see the same things there, just differing degrees. And you also, by going to this third world country, you have put yourself in the top category. And so if you're a local guy, you'll be seeing the same trends. And it wouldn't, I mean, Chinese guys talk about the same issues American men do with dating and the dating apps there, because it's fundamentally the same technology and it's the same issues.
Yeah, I don't know if guys are, but I do know in some of those societies there isn't the whole stigma around approaching nowadays. I mean, this is where I think America and the West has just went nuts. I mean, you just can't.
I mean,
Yeah.
the thing with feminism is it's reached the point where its end goal is putting women in a position where they will never feel anxious and they will never feel emotionally disturbed. The problem with that is the way you deal with negative emotions is by confronting them. If any therapist will tell you, if you're scared of driving, you gradually build up to being able to drive. You conquer that fear. And
Yeah.
what feminism says is that if you're scared of driving, never see a car. If anyone brings up a car, you should shame them. If we need to design our society so you never see cars on the road. And that just continually makes you more scared of cars. And it builds up the fear and the anxiety worse and worse and worse. And so, it's what we've gotten into is we've got into a rabbit hole where you get exponentially worse returns for playing the game. And we don't have the social institutions to basically say, this is ridiculous, we're not listening to you anymore, because every institution in society is incentivized to continue to play this game. Whether for votes, for purchasing stuff, for purchasing, for viewership, whatever. And we've removed any sense of objective moral structures in our society. And so we've removed any ability to say, this is retarded. You can't do that. That's insane.
Well, really, a lot of this also started with the academics. I mean, they were the ones who were pushing this nonsense long before anybody else did, and you created this divorce culture, this divorce culture, and this structure. And when you have so many people who are coming out of unstable families now too, I think that makes a huge difference.
The end goal is the complete abdication of responsibility. If you look at feminism, their goal is to abdicate, or the left in general, the left's goal is the abdication of responsibility. And you see this in every single level, where in communism, the ideal communist society, you have no responsibility because the group takes care of you. And that's why people like it. And because a lot of people, they are not competitively minded. They don't want to win. They want to not lose. And with feminism, what you look at all of its end goals is you can never judge a woman for doing something incorrectly. If a woman gets pregnant, she can get an abortion. If she doesn't like a man, she can get a divorce. If she doesn't like a hookup, she can cancel the guy. And so the onus is always on society to allow women to abdicate responsibility. And this is what you see across the whole left. Communism, abdicating responsibility for intellectuals and the working classes. Various race things, it allows colonial nations or ethnic minorities to abdicate responsibility. Look at Cuba and Cuba, communist Cuba. Communist Cuba will never tell its population, we fucked up. This is our problem. We will try to fix it. They will blame everything upon America, thus abdicating the failure that is their country upon a foreign power.
Well, and also, just the abdication of responsibility for criminals. They were a victim of society.
Yes.
And, it's and really it's the growth of what I would call victim culture. And unfortunately, Rudyard, you've talked about it too. You talked about helicopter parenting and this safety culture. I know one video you talked about drawing a picture of a gun or a sword.
Yeah.
And your parents got called.
Yeah.
That started with Columbine. That kind of insanity was after Columbine. And it was a very gradual process, but that would not have happened back. And I have to say too, in a way, I am glad I came up when I did, because there was not the fad of drugging kids when I was in grade school. Because I realize now I probably would have been drugged if I'd been in school 20 years later.
And it's crazy that the things that we're putting on kids are literal.
Yeah.
Adderall is meth. I mean, you hear stories, or it's easy to see people getting addicted to Adderall. And one of my pet peeves is people, and I just want to jump back to your previous point before I jump on my next one. Yeah, I drew a sword when I was 10 in school, and they called my parents in because they were worried I might be violent.
Yeah.
And that is so ridiculous. And the irony is that that sets up a much worse thing, because that is a generational experience of young men across my entire age category. If you tell an entire generation of young men that all violence is bad, and then tell them they're horrible people no matter what they do and kick them in the face, you are setting up an incentive for something very bad to happen. Once these young men realize that they're screwed, they'll never pass on their genes, they'll never get a real job, they'll never buy a house, and the society tells them they're terrible no matter what they do. And that's why I say we'll have a revolution. But to jump onto what I was going to say next is, what was your point? You made a point that I was going to jump off on.
I was talking about how kids are raised now versus how helicopter parenting, stuff like that.
It's
the culture of safety. Yeah,
it's interesting. Please.
For example, watch the 1976 version of the Bad News Bears, or go back and watch a sitcom from the 50s and 60s. Maybe Leave It to Beaver or My Three Sons. And not letting kids do stuff. And I've said this a million times on this show, but my grandfather walked 2 miles to school each way as a first grader.
Yeah.
And letting kids create their own wins, and letting them find ways to be capable and set things up, or kids playing sports by themselves, completely disorganized, 5-10-year-old kids or 10-year-old kids on the playground just starting to play basketball. All you got to do is give them a ball and they just go. It's.
By the time I was at high school, when I was in high school and I mostly lived with my dad, he said, "Go outside whenever you want, do whatever you want. I don't need to know what you do," because that's what I did as a teenager. And if I was raised that way, you'll be fine. And it shocks me that attitude is not more common, because the parents of my generation are people who were raised that way. They did do whatever they wanted in high school. They did wander around. They had their own experiences. And this is one of those shocking things where it surprises me how rapidly it occurred and no one commented upon it. Where when I was growing up, it was normal for kids to not have any independence through high school, to not be allowed to go outside of the house with their parents' permission. They're always scheduled to go to events. They're always doing new stuff. And I'm glad that my dad raised me the way I did, because it allows me to be a competent, independent adult. I run my own business, but I look at other kids, and even through college, I knew a bunch of kids where their parents would keep tabs on them through college. And toward the end of high school, I knew kids where their parents would walk them to and from school. Seniors, or one of my high school friends, his parents wanted to move to the new state where he was going to college to keep tabs on him. It's that degree of insanity. And my father let me hike 600 miles in the Appalachian Trail by myself when I got out of high school. And that is not normal for Gen Z parents. And I see this generation of kids, and they're kind of zombies, where loads of kids my age, they get out of school. They don't know who they are. They don't know how to operate in the world. They don't know anything. And it's partly the reason they support leftist totalitarianism, because they want the state to step in and be that parent, because they were not allowed to develop independently.
Rudyard, I don't know. I don't think it happened overnight. I think it was a gradual process, because I can remember my brothers, who were 12 and 11 years older than I was. They went to junior high, and they could leave the junior high at lunchtime. And when I went to that junior high, we were not allowed to go at lunchtime. Yeah. So, and this was all, just a safety issue, because it was dangerous for us to leave school. So I don't know. I think it was all a very gradual process, but like the loss of high diving boards at public swimming pools, and just other things like that just went away. We had lawn darts. Yeah.
I think it's a combination of feminization / single mothers and urbanization. I think those two factors added up to create it.
And also groups like Child Protective Services and stuff just looking for something to do.
That's also bureaucratization, the third one I'd throw in there. I think those are.
I knew kids, who broke their arm. Their parents had taken them to the doctor and that was done. You have a kid with a broken arm nowadays and go to the hospital. I mean, you're going to get interrogated for 2 or 3 hours. And it's just like, please, kids, don't get your arm broken. Something
I would see growing up is if you would let your, let's say, 10-year-old kid walk around the neighborhood or walk to school, other parents would call the cops on that. And I just think that's none of your fucking business what the other kid does. It's not your problem. And I see this. I said urbanization and feminization because for humans, for our entire history, we were a rural species. We evolved to live in communities where we knew everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think we didn't know how to deal with living in societies where you don't know your neighbors or other people. And I mean, if we're keeping it totally real, you look at a family, the mother will be worrying about the children and worrying about, are they doing okay? The dad will be there and say, the kid's going to be fine. Let them do their thing. Don't worry about it, mom. And then with the rising divorces and with feminization of society, you saw a lot of households, it might be a majority, which are single moms. And the single mom without a father, it removes the position of the dad saying, let the kid be. He can figure it out himself.
Yeah. I do wonder if that's a difference. Yeah, and I don't know how we get out of this. Sometimes I'm an older guy, but there's some aspects I like about Tate. I mean, the most powerful thing about Tate is whether his stories are true or not, he is just a great storyteller.
Yes.
He tells great. I mean, he's like Aesop, or it's. I mean, in some ways, it just he tells these little stories, and you realize that that's really powerful, And I suspect he makes some of them up, but some of them are probably true as well. It's just
the thing about Tate as well is he's not trying to sell you on, or he is literally trying to sell you on something, but he doesn't preach. And my target audience is young men. Most people I know are young men. And preaching at young men is ineffective because that axis won't work. If you want to tell young men how to improve themselves, give them a logical breakthrough of what skills to acquire and how it is useful for them. If you want to get young men to be Christian, as an example, don't preach at them and tell them you should be Christian because it's the right thing to do because God will be shamed if you're not. Tell them if you're Christian, you can meet cool people, you can develop a close relationship with God, you can entrench yourself in a millennia-old tradition. But our society doesn't do that. And even Peterson, where I have profound respect for Peterson, some of the stuff he does comes across as preaching at young men. And he did a better job of almost anyone. But with Tate, Tate is like a tribal warlord who says, if you follow me, I will give you gold and glory. And he is the only person who has done that so far.
Yeah, I think it helps that Jordan Peterson, at least up until recently, I thought he was completely honest. He was always honest about his own shortcomings as well. Although it seems like now that he's involved with the Daily Wire, I don't know what to think about it. Like he's more tooting their own horn, and it's also interesting too when you already see that he's got a daughter who's now married, baby, divorced, remarried. So it's like, okay, what happened here? I don't know. Obviously, that's not completely on him, but it makes me wonder because Jordan Peterson, with women, he got lucky. He found his wife when he was 10 or 11 years old, I guess, and that's. I know some couples who are like that, and it's like I think we all envy them to a certain degree. It said, "Boy, I wish it could have been that easy for me." It's.
I don't know. I want to. If I got married right after high school with someone I knew in my childhood, that would remove a tremendous amount of just chaotic and fun and growth experiences.
You can go do that stuff together. And some of the people I know who got married and had kids young too, once they're 45, it's like, hey, now I can have fun. I'm 45, my kids are almost out of the house. So now I can go have fun. And I'm still not that old, but yeah, it's also got to figure if your relationship can, say survive junior high and high school, then it probably can't survive anything.
Yeah, I think of all of the changes I've made since junior high, and I was a completely different person back then. I've lived in a bunch of places. I've changed my entire life. It's wild. I just, life is wild. It always blows my mind to see what changes and what comes new. And that's a statement both about what life is like as an individual and what it's like to watch politics play out.
Yeah. Yeah. So you watch politics play out. Yeah. So, I'm curious, what do you think about the future of tech? What do you think about Bitcoin?
So there is a Dunning-Kruger, and I have passed it for history, where I know that if you have read 100 books on a certain topic, your concept of what that is incredibly different from 10 books. And I see this with history, where if you're just a casual history buff, you'll view the Middle Ages as a dark age. If you're really into history, you'll realize medieval Europe was the most advanced society up to its point in history. And you see with a bunch of other things where if you're casually into history, you might think that the Roman Empire was a period of rapid technological progress. If you're really into history, you realize the Romans invented close to nothing. And so there is this bell curve that when you get to the other side, you realize unless you've really studied the topic, you have to be careful. And I'm with that place with tech, where there's a handful of things I refuse to have opinions on. I don't know what's going on with climate change. I don't know if sperm count declining is dangerous. I don't know if AI is dangerous, because I know that for these topics, you have to have studied them for a very long time to get it right. And then you're still probably going to be wrong. People ask me about AI, and I have no idea. I try to be honest about that. And for Bitcoin, again, Bitcoin is not something where I'm going to pretend to be an expert, but I would say the shortcoming I see very few people talk about in crypto circles is money is dependent upon military force. As my father said, the US dollar is BS backed by aircraft carriers and nukes. Bitcoin is BS backed by a bunch of nerds. And I've never seen, I hung in Bitcoin circles for a second. I've never seen someone in those circles explain to me why the US government just doesn't crush these people if they're a threat. And also how these network states are supposed to deal with just the reality that the nation is dependent upon military force, where Ohio can't secede because it's going to be beaten into the ground by the rest of America. And it's just, it reminds me, I've never seen a rebuttal to that.
Well, I'm pro Bitcoin, but there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things out there to wonder about where it goes from here. I see it possibly as a better hope for the world, that maybe we can restructure society. But how do you think we get out of the mess that we're in right now? Because where do you think America will be in say 100 years?
There's no solutions to these issues. Problems work themselves out and we find something new. I mean, if Europe before the French Revolution or the Black Death, you don't solve those things. They happen. And then as the world changes, you develop new solutions for the new world. And I think we need to see the old order burn down. And then once we've seen it burn down, we can find some new trees to build up a new house.
Yeah, let's hope we can do that. I mean, sometimes you never know where a solution may come out of nowhere too.
One of my rules for my own personal life is that I don't take opportunities until they're good. Because the thing is, if you're trying to push an opportunity that you haven't fully realized, what that means is that you are too busy focusing on that to see other future opportunities. And so I always maintain this degree of strategic flexibility around myself, so that if there is a new good opportunity, I can immediately jump onto it. And that's how I feel about this, where we will know the solutions when we see them, and let's be in a position where we're open to finding new good solutions.
Yeah. What made you decide to come to Austin?
Los Angeles was horrible. I mean, I lived there for a few months.
Okay,
I tried to form a social club for influencers. That failed. I didn't want to go back to Philadelphia because just too many memories, and I'm a young guy, so I don't want to have to be in the place where I remember my entire childhood happening. And Austin, I love Texas. Texas is a good place. It's people are very kind here. It's open. It's decently affordable. It's got a lot of energy and dynamism. It's right leaning, but not like dogmatically so. And there's a great community of interesting people in Austin. And so I just thought YOLO'd it and moved here.
Austin still does have that. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of meetups. I mean, when I moved down here, I noticed it had twice as many Toastmasters clubs as Columbus, Ohio. And I thought that was, I mean, it's just very, very, very easy to find this social life. Although there's a lot of the hippy dippy social life. It's just, and there's a lot of victim culture out there too. You know, people asking like, why are you here? You know, it's where, yeah, you've traveled there. Where do you would you go somewhere else around the world? Because theoretically, you could live anywhere.
Yeah, the reason I didn't move to Dallas is there wasn't a single bookstore in downtown Dallas.
That's a good point. Yeah, we have our bookstores here. It's
I was thinking it's just a proxy for the culture of the area. But I mean, I'll do that when I have to. I'll figure out where I have to live whenever I have to make that decision. I mean, I did the nomad shtick. I lived in a bunch of countries, and what you find after a certain point is everywhere feels the same when you've been to too many places. I was in Thailand, in Phuket, and I had this moment where I thought, this place looks like Florida. And that was in a lot of ways a black pill on travel, where for every stage of your life, you need something different. And for this stage, I want to sit still.
Was there anything that really stood out? Any place that really stood out for you? It said, so you were doing international nomad for a while.
There are two places that I think were just stunningly beautiful. I was on the Appalachian Trail, and I stopped at this place in upstate New York named Paradise Lake, and it's in Westchester County. And I had gone through this lemon squeezer, which is this one of the hardest rock formations in the Appalachian Trail, right? To throw my pack down and climb down through the rocks. And I saw this lake. It was stunningly beautiful. It was 75 degrees, sunny. It was old growth forest, so there were beautiful trees everywhere. This wasn't scrubs. I went swimming in the lake, and then I got a leech on my hand. I had to burn the leech off with fire. I had to start my stove to burn the leech off. And I remember Paradise Lake being just stunningly beautiful. I guess it fits its name. But and then Nîmes in France was also incredible. I remember going there and just being shocked at how beautiful Nîmes was. It's this old Roman city that the French built on top of in the 18th century. And it just, in France, you get to places where it's like you're living in a piece of art. Because in America, all of our cities are living things where things are still happening. You move to Austin, you know that Austin has not reached its final form. And that partly makes our cities kind of gross and materialistic and whatever. But the negative side is we're still doing something. In France, you get to places where you know this was artistically manufactured over centuries, and it looks perfect, but it has also reached its final form. It's like looking at a piece of art. And that's what Nîmes felt like.
Yeah, wow. Any place really stood out that you hated, or maybe mention that?
The worst country I've been in the world is China. And I went there right before COVID happened, and I have other friends who went to China years before in 2015 or 2010 who said it was amazing. But when I went to China in 2019, it was, I remember going to the Great Wall, which is 2 hours outside Beijing, and you couldn't see anything because the smog was so thick. This is industrial smog, not clouds. And you'd go to major Chinese cities and you couldn't see the sun because there was so much pollution. None of the Chinese looked happy. They were all rushing around, looked stressed. They all worked 12-hour days, or many of them worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Whenever you go to a hotel, they have to scan your eyes and your fingerprints and your passport. Whenever you go through there were a couple of train stations I went to where they used to put your luggage through security twice for a train station. I just got the impression that I called China a functioning Mordor. It felt like I was in a Mordor that had the trains run on time where people were fed. And I know there is a beautiful China. I know people who loved China years before, but when I went there in 2019, it felt dystopian.
Yeah, that's the impression I got there, just from changing planes in Beijing. The number of times that I was asked to show my passport and all I was doing was changing planes. It's like, no, I'm not coming back here.
Yeah.
It's
and now we might go back to China. I mean, one of my predictions that came true was that China would become a Maoist state, and they have fully realized that.
Yeah, I wonder, is this socialism, but is socialism going to die, or is it just going to reform itself and keep coming back?
I mean,
I was alive when the Berlin Wall came down. We did not think we would still be fighting this.
Yeah, I think socialism is an inbuilt bug we will see until we realize what the philosophic flaw in modernity is, and also what toxic femininity is. And until we fix those, we'll keep seeing socialism and leftism in new forms, because the two cognitive bugs you see with that, the first is the technological project, or the idea that we can use technology and social engineering to build a utopia. That is an idea that most people subconsciously still believe. But over time, we have realized that that's a complete lie. And until we realize that, socialism will keep popping up because people will still be treating this false utopia as a real political option. Well, the reality is that the left is a messianic cult. It's the equivalent of back in the Middle Ages, people begging to have the end of days. Because when you look at the left, they want the end of days. They want a utopia. And we still treat it as a real political option. And the second thing is that socialism in the left is toxic femininity. And now we're very good at seeing toxic masculinity, but we don't see how the female equivalent, which is just lying, irrationality, envy, like coddling people and you having an Oedipal relationship with your society where you coddle them and use your care for them as a means to control them.
Yeah.
And until we come to those two conclusions, we will keep seeing the left. And I think people like us are coming to those conclusions now, and we weren't even 5 years ago. I think I had no concept of these things 5 years ago, and I was a teenager, so that's not a fair comparison. But I think that's a general social move. But until the society realizes that, I think these things will keep popping up. And I think that that's going to happen over the next few decades, because our need to fix the birth rate will fundamentally destroy so many of our philosophic assumptions. Because if you're in a society with a declining population, with society falling apart, ideas that come from the Middle Ages or the ancient world are going to look, and I think it'll be a combination of old religions and new religions. Ideas that seem very pre-modern will look popular because fixing the birth rate and society falling apart are things that the Romans or people in medieval China could empathize with. And the things that you would hear about in the 20th century of building a utopia, that'll just be out of people's minds. Because if you look at a significant amount of young people on both political sides today just want to have a farm and a family and get out of society. And that's not something people in the 20th century could understand.
Yeah. I think also just, the first red pill is often when you know somebody or you yourself get falsely accused by a woman. It's
yes.
And I jokingly say every time a man or every time a woman falsely accuses an innocent man, Andrew Tate gets another follow on Twitter.
Yes.
I don't know if that's accurate.
That happened multiple times.
Yeah.
And that's also how I got red pilled. It wasn't a big false accusation, but I did get falsely accused. And that's what that is what happened to me.
And you're talking to a guy who, granted, I'm older, but I remember as an 8-year-old, I loved Charlie's Angels because it had strong, beautiful women who kicked ass, or even later Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's, I don't want women to be weak and helpless. But I think a lot of these guys start out as somewhat as feminists, and then they get. Well, often, the cynic is just the collapsed or the failed idealist.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't want this to turn into resentment, because I see I'm part of the space of young men. I am part of that ecosystem. And I see the reaction against it. And I look at stuff where if a woman does anything on Twitter or Instagram, people will call her a whore. And even if it's not justified. And you need to reach a position where whatever is coming next is not going to be a reaction to feminism. It has to be its own thing that is driven by its own moral compass, independently of just reacting against feminism.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. A lot of the things that were reactions to Marxism ended up being a disaster as well. I mean,
yeah,
That was most of the fascism of the 20th century, and it's almost as if people can't see more than two bad options. It's like, can you see a third choice? Can you see a fourth choice?
It's because once you remove history, religion, because history and religion are two things that allow you to massively increase your scope of view. Because if you study history, you have thousands of years of references to pull on for things to think about. If you use religion and fantasy, I'm putting in the same category. For both of them, they open your field of vision for possibilities of the human condition tremendously. Because you can pull upon mythology and all these really weird concepts that don't practically make sense. But with history and with fantasy, you can expand your scope of what's possible. But in our society today, this is something I've been thinking about and I've wanted to make a video about, but I haven't been able to fully realize is that our time scope has been shrinking drastically. We can't think even a day ahead. We've lost any sense of what time means. It's like we're stuck in one infinite present on repeat. And it's like we're a train that's always trying to go faster, but we're running out of coal. And because of that, we don't have any concept of what the future is. And this is something I see across the right and the left. The left has no concept of the future. They're just resentfully hating the past. And I don't see anyone on the right who has this broad vision of what the world could be. And because they're all reacting against what the left is.
Yeah, and there's definitely, obviously you're only 22, but like how many times have I heard this is the most important election of our lifetime? It's
I've heard that.
Okay, can we agree that maybe the next one's not going to be the most important election of our lifetime?
This election might be, though, because it might spur the next civil war.
Yeah, well, you know what I've said too. The last time we had a JB president, we had a civil war. It's James Buchanan. I don't know.
Last time we had a Pennsylvania president, we had a civil war.
Yeah, surprisingly, he's the only Pennsylvania president we've had. Yeah, so.
Yeah, Buchanan and Biden. Biden's from Pennsylvania. I actually used to live in the same town as Biden. I lived in Centerville, Delaware, which is this tiny hamlet right in the Pennsylvania-Delaware border. Biden lived in the state a couple miles outside town, and the only two things in Centerville are a thrift shop and a diner.
Yeah, that's there's that one video too about the Pennsylvania-Delaware border and how it got formed. I don't know. It's
a lot of like politicking in the 1600s. That's the short answer. We've gone over an hour. I should probably get going.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, it's been a great talk. Yeah, you have anything else you want to say before we go, or where we can find you?
I talk about so many different subjects, and if you wanted me to cover everything, we'd be here for weeks.
You're good. Yeah. And you have your other podcast. I love that you had Orson Scott Card on. I'd love to get him on too sometime too. That would be awesome. Yeah. And any good novelist. I mean, or interesting novelist. But yeah. So. Okay, well, and you're at just the WhatIfAltHist channel that's on YouTube.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Chris Baker. Please check out my Substack, like the video, subscribe, check out my novel, Escape from the Village. Please follow me on Twitter as well. Thank you, Rudyard Lynch. We are out.